Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending upon your time zone. Welcome to the Early Information Science and VKTR Vector webinar series. And this is part 6 of our 7-part series. So today we're talking about vendor strategies, and we have people from Coveo, Sinequa, Squirro, and Lucidworks, and you're going to hear who they are in just a minute. And each one is going to give a little bit of a background of their company and themselves. Why don't I just have folks introduce themselves really quickly. Patrick, since you don't have a company slide, but why don't you tell people who you are? You've been part of all of these sessions. So for the newbies today, Patrick.
Yeah, hello. My name is Patrick Heppel. I'm with PH Partners, and what I do is I translate deep technical concepts in search and AI into language and terms that people can understand so that they can get their heads around and hands around what it is that these technologies do.
Terrific. Sanjay?
Hi, everyone. Sanjay Mehta and solution architect here, and we have a long history with in the search space, Lucidworks last, and Reflection, and Deca, and Answer Logic, Primus, keep going for a long list. And my focus has been more around applied AI for search, as well as the commerce and search applications. So excited to be here.
Wonderful. How about yourself, Dave?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Dave Clark. I am the founder of a company called Synaptica, which is deep in taxonomy management knowledge graphs. And we were acquired by Squirro, so I'm here in the context of Squirro, which is enterprise search.
How about yourself, Ollie?
Yeah, hi, I'm Olivier Tetsu. I'm the product manager for machine learning at Coveo. I'm happy to be here. Coveo, we're a search company. Introduce us in a little bit. So thank you.
Absolutely. And Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Evernham. I'm in charge of strategy for Sinequa. Sinequa is an enterprise search and AI company. So my role is to track the technology in the market and plan our next steps.
Wonderful. And Brian?
Hi, everyone. Brian Land. I lead our solutions engineers here at Lucidworks. We help design, deploy a lot of search solutions, including Gen AI over the past couple of years. Been here 7 years, based out of Austin, originally at Endeca, similar to Sanjay. Great to see everyone.
Great. And since we have such a large panel, we're going to move through this. Well, we move through our intros really quickly, but you're going to hear from each of the panelists who are representing one of the search companies a little bit about Gen AI, how it impacted them in terms of their strategy, what they needed to change, and then a little bit about what the company is offering, and then we'll jump into our discussion points. So I want to thank CMS Wire and VKTR Vector, who are media sponsors. We're recording today. We'll try to give you some time for Q&A, but you can ask questions throughout. There is a Q&A tab. So ask your questions in the Q&A tab. And then we have a couple of polls and then a survey after the session. So please feel free to participate in those. Early information science been around since 1994, and the work we do is all about information architecture, information management. I coined a phrase called "There's no AI without IA, no artificial intelligence without information architecture." So we've always been an information architecture first firm. Sanjay and I and one of our other colleagues just did a workshop at KM World on building knowledge architecture for generative AI, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. Again, if you haven't had a chance to listen to the other sessions, those are all recorded and available on the website. And then we have one more session in 2 weeks on how it's really impacted people's lives. So a great comprehensive series. I'm a little behind in my writing, but I just submitted session 4 Vector, and we'll have the rest of them as well because we have everything recorded. So why don't I turn it over to Dave to just give a little bit of who Squirro is, and then and Synaptica, of course, how it fit in, and then how did this impact the organization in terms of what you're doing?
Thanks, Seth. So Squirro is an enterprise search company. They were an early adopter of generative AI, and my company, Synaptica, has been around almost 30 years. We did taxonomy management systems, classification, and so forth. And taxonomy obviously morphed into more sophisticated ontology management applications. Everything that we do is about making organizations more efficient, and with a generative AI, it's a really high emphasis on trust and trustworthy, accurate information. The little pipeline here is a kind of a way of telling the story of Synaptica with Squirro. So the taxonomy on the far left feeds into the classification and information extraction processes, which are more Squirro than Synaptica. They then feed into a knowledge graph, which is more Synaptica than Squirro. And then that feeds into the sort of the end results of discovery, insight, search, and most excitingly, what we've been working on is GraphRag as a Gen AI application. The little sort of dial at the far right is how we kind of put this all together. You'll see knowledge graphs are a part of this, but privacy and guardrails are really, really core to how we are adopting Gen AI. And I think you could move to the next slide, Seth. Okay, so how has it impacted our organization? The first thing is we consume our own product. We built Squirro, by the way, is the German word for squirrel, hence the logo there with a little squirrel. And we built an AI internal application called Acorn, where we go find the things that squirrels go looking for. And this Gen AI application is basically, it's a RAG application that we all use. If we're answering an RFP, we answer that RFP conversationally. If we need to know financial data, we can ask that information conversationally, and our own application is going and finding that. So the first impact here is how it's changed life for our employees, and essentially it makes us all more productive. The second impact for the business is affecting our products. So we've gone from just regular enterprise semantic search based on vectors to RAG as a conversational form of search. I mean, there's still regular search, but Gen AI is helping us build those others. And we're integrating the graph with that to improve the accuracy. So that's kind of big impact in the product world. And the third thing is how it affects life for our clients. And I think one of the biggest things I would say there is it's not just about finding information, it's improving the return on investment for clients by being able to automate business processes, and hopefully talk a little bit more about that later on.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go to Sinequa.
Sure. So Sinequa is an enterprise search company, of course, has turned into a generative AI company like everybody else is incorporating that generative AI into the platform. We are really focusing on building assistants that are powered behind the scenes with search to take all your corporate knowledge, make that usable and actionable, to actually incorporate workflows into that as well. So you're not just retrieving information and looking at a summary, but you can actually conduct multi-step processes and even moving into the agents realm where assistants can take actions on your behalf. Where we've been in the search space for a very long time, and our focus really is on complex use cases, typically involving very high scale, lots of different people, lots of different heterogeneous data sources. So we kind of thrive where there's a lot of complexity involved in the information landscape. I'll also mention we were acquired a couple weeks ago by a company called Chaps Vision. They are building an end-to-end data platform, and we complement them by bringing unstructured content and AI to their structured data platform. And we're looking forward to being able to tap into their larger resources as they continue to build a data platform available for companies across the globe. And we were asked to put together a slide that talked about how has generative AI changed things. So if you go to the next slide, I will say generative AI has changed pretty much everything, but I'll break it out into 4 different categories. One, how has it changed Sinequa in terms of what we do? Well, we have embraced generative AI in our tools, leveraging our existing technology and layering generative AI on top of that. So that helps us in terms of managing our internal knowledge, but also in forms of some of the more traditional things where it helps to retrieve information, it helps to coding, and really using it as a tool to improve the quality of our work. From a market perspective, I would say that one of the biggest impacts is it's caused a bit of confusion. And, no surprise, right? This is new technology. It's exciting technology. It's overhyped technology, but it really has the potential to be transformative. So customers are a little confused on what's generative AI versus search versus RAG versus assistants versus agents. We can talk a little bit about some of that today, and I know some of that's been covered in this series here. It's also changing very quickly. And one of the big things is getting to POC is actually easier now than it ever has before because there are open source tools that now work with language. But moving from POC to production, that's just as hard as it's always been. So that's brought an additional point of confusion. For our customers, they are deploying this generative AI, they're deploying these assistants carefully and measured because there are some questions about, hey, how can this work on my data and those sorts of things, but they're really seeing that the search summaries are there and conversation first assistants are in play. And it looks like I didn't finish my bullet point, but there's some they're taking a look at some of the critical pieces and not deploying it to mission critical things yet. And then the future is huge. I really do believe this is fundamentally transformative in terms of the way we work with information and the way we work with computers. Generative AI can really, for the first time, address, let's face it, what's the weak link in all of this? It's actually the human. We are not consistent. We don't use the same words. We don't necessarily take the time that we should to perform our work or read everything comprehensively. And guess what? That's what generative AI is really good at. So by combining the human with the computer now, we can really address some of the core problems and augment employees by giving them a coworker who's never tired, never talks back, and is willing to go out and do a lot of work. And then we'll extend that with the agent framework in the coming year.
They don't talk back yet.
Well, I guess you could tell them to.
There was a GPT called Marv, the sarcastic chatbot, but I could never get it to work. So
quick little side story. When the advanced voice mode came out on ChatGPT, I tried to get two versions to have an argument with one another. And my biggest frustration is they're too nice. After like 3 or 4 exchanges, they were like, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. I still think this a little bit, but you're making a good argument.
That's funny.
So they're very conciliatory.
That's great. Okay, Lucidworks, Brian.
Thanks, Seth. Hey, I'm Brian. I work for Lucidworks, and this is, at Lucidworks, we are an enterprise-grade search and discovery platform. Our mantra is to make search a superpower for our customers. Now, we do skew towards larger companies. I would say Fortune 1000, split between commerce, KM, customer service. 5 of the top 10 retailers use Lucidworks, but that's about half of our customers. The other half are the knowledge management, customer service type applications. And we're global, been around for over 12 years. And I agree with that earlier comment. Like I've seen that Gen AI is transformative. I started my search career in 2001 with Endeca. We developed the first faceted search, but with Gen AI out with search in the last 2 years, it's been amazing. And we'll talk about a little bit how we do it in the next slide, more of an architecture slide. But, at the very top, like I mentioned, we power the commerce, customer service, and knowledge management. And we've been doing traditional machine learning for about 8 years. And that's like the click boosting based on your user signals and the classification jobs, NER, recommendations, and things like that. But when we hooked up to large language models, there's so much more that can be done. Answer any questions, a RAG, or enabled now. And you'll see at the bottom, Lucidworks AI, we actually have a cloud service where we host a bunch of models, whether it being embedding models, as well as open source models like Llama 3 and Mistral. But we also allow customers to integrate with their OpenAI or Gemini and other LLMs. So we are large language model agnostic, but since we do host quite a few models, some of our sensitive customers with about data and data leakage, they want to leverage those. But we have customers too, where they're already running models on Azure or Databricks, Amazon. So we can also integrate with that. But it's amazing how it can be a transformative, not just an experience, but in the cleanup of data, classification, add entity enrichment to your document, summarization, conversational search. So really excited about this call today. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Awesome. Now, Coveo.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Seth. So at Coveo, we're also a search company, of course, right? We have a key focus in 4 distinct use cases. So really commerce, service, website, and workplace. All leveraging our, core platform and unified index, right? That's a proprietary index, but, with specialized AI models that are tailored to each use case, of course. We've been in search business for about, 25 years. And as everybody else said, right, Gen AI definitely has changed the game in the past few years. If you can head to the next slide, Seth, prepared this little slide, right? But as a guiding line in terms of how it's impacted, right, our people and our products, right, as I like to say. So in terms of our people, right, it's really impacted, our internal processes, right, making our, teams way more efficient, empowering them to create even their own LLM agents, perform specific tasks. So you can see the marketing team tailoring and catering their own, agent to write copy, whereas our documentation team can have its own as well. And they can actually be reused across teams. So really cool to see, collaboration there and the efficiency that brings. We're also seeing faster iterations, right, as Jeff was saying earlier, in terms of, ability to test things and try things out, as well as improved communication, right? Let's face it, not everybody has the same level, right, when it comes to communicating ideas, communicating knowledge. I think these tools are really great for that. And on our product side, right, we were one of the first to actually productionize a fully hosted and packaged RAG applications, right? So really, Coveo relevance generative answering. So we have, over 30 customers that are currently live in production using this for question answering. We've seen great results, right, on the service and support side in terms of case deflection. And now we're actually exposing even a passage retrieval API, right? So, passages, not documents, as I say. So it's really a new paradigm for us search providers, right? How can we, not only power search experiences, but also power, other inners, if you will, of experiences to power generative, experiences, custom chatbots, custom, applications, leveraging LLMs. So, yeah, that's what I had. Back to you, Steph.
Thank you. So I do want to have a poll, and I do want to hear from Sanjay and Patrick's thoughts about the marketplace, but I'd want to understand, how familiar are you with RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation? And just let me know. It looks like we have just a few folks on the call today, which is okay. This is a 7-part series, so a lot of people are listening to this after the fact. I see a couple of folks in initial investigation. So this is interesting. So it's kind of two ends of the scale. We'll give you another minute or two. I know we have a few more people who can participate, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. A lot of folks are in early investigation or initial investigation, which is interesting. Nobody's saying it's not on the radar, and no one's saying none of the above, right? So multiple use cases, initial investigation. If there's another one or two folks that want to participate, that would be great. I'll give you a countdown. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I guess I have no other takers. So let's share the results. And as you can see, it's kind of skewed to two ends of the spectrum. Some people have a lot of use cases in production, which is great, and others are in the initial investigation stage. So I think we're finding that quite a bit. And, one of the things I wanted to ask, and maybe I can throw this out to Patrick and Sanjay, since we haven't heard from them, but when you first saw this, what did you think? I mean, I think you were both working for search company. You're both with Lucidworks at the time. Is that correct? When you first saw ChatGPT?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And my first thought was, wow, finally, we've been trying to get a way to understand what users are actually trying to ask. And finally, this looks like this might be the technology that gets us there. And as a longtime search practitioner, this is in some ways a holy grail of where the search industry has been trying to get to for a really long time. My second thought was that this isn't going to overtake search. It's going to make search more important, more relevant. And I think the last 2 years have borne that out.
Absolutely. How about yourself, Sanjay?
Yeah, I think especially how much it was going to improve search, right? Rather than getting folks to results, getting them an answer. I think the whether it's e-commerce or other use cases, right? It's how much it kind of reduces that friction of finding, like product discovery or customer service. So that definitely the enormous benefits there, but also how many enormous use cases there could be across that whole like data life cycle or journey, right? All the way from, the sourcing and enrichment, all the way, of course, to retrieval and generation and those sorts of things. So, I mean, it's a huge tool now as an asset for us as practitioners, right?
Absolutely. And what I'd like to throw out to the panel is, and the rest of the folks is, it's obvious to us why search is so critical to successful Gen AI adoption. What is the argument to leadership, right? Because a lot of folks, I think, are somewhat confused in the marketplace because they thought that, well, they're starting to get a little wiser to it. They thought that it was something that was going to obviate the need for certain things. I know my first reaction was, existential crisis. Am I out of a job, right? With information management, information architecture. And then the more I researched, the more I realized that it was the work I did was more important than ever, right? The content curation, the content quality, the information architecture, the knowledge architecture, all of those things are important. But why don't you guys give us some arguments for leadership to say, well, why do you really need to think about this in a different way other than getting answers from a large language model? Jeff, do you want to throw your ideas out?
Sure. I think the simplest way to put it is we recognize that giving computers the ability to speak to us in our language, the ability to process large amounts of information very, very quickly, to be able to, distill that into the key components that we're interested in. All of those things are kind of obvious value drivers, right? I can be more productive. I can be more effective because I can be more comprehensive, and I can probably even be more accurate because I've now got I'll steal Brian's term. I got somebody with superpowers who's helping me do this. But in order to take advantage of any of those things on your own corporate internal data, you have to pair it with search. So I think that's the driver there. You want to be part of this revolution. You want to give these capabilities to your employees, but the only way you can give it to them in a way that is intelligent on something that's not public data, not something that it was trained on, is by combining it with search into RAG. And so we've got that split there. I think recognizes that on the survey you did. We've got some companies that, hey, yeah, we're off and running with this because we realize this works. And we've got others that are like, hey, I've heard this is the path to get to that point, so let me figure out how to do it.
Great. And again, retrieval augmented generation starts with retrieval. These are retrieval.
Yeah, and as you said, the output of the generative AI is only going to be as good as the content you feed it. Garbage in, garbage out still matters. So you've got to get that retrieval part right to have accurate, reliable, comprehensive results.
Absolutely. Brian, Ollie, Dave, did you want to add anything to that in terms of the arguments around search and why it's so critical? And of course, to get search right, we have to get our content and our data right. You want to talk more?
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely agree with everything Jeff said, but I think one key aspect of it also is truthfulness, right? And remembering what the generative AI models are made for and are good at, right? Like in the end, what they're doing is predicting essentially what the next word should be for any given input, right? Well, when we're speaking about words, of course, right? Like not when we're in multimodal and images and anything like that. So leveraging the best of that ability, but remembering that, retrieval is still a search problem, it's still a retrieval problem, right? And in the end, I think, especially in the enterprise, no enterprise can afford to even risk, getting the next word to be predicted to be wrong about the information that they're actually returning, right? So I think, that truthfulness and that traceability really matters and will keep mattering in the enterprise, right? It will not go away.
Absolutely.
One other thought to add on, which is we focus very much obviously on the generative aspect because that's the hype phrase, generative AI. But the biggest wow moment when I was playing with ChatGPT is the flip side of that coin, and it's natural language understanding and getting machines to understand intent, getting machines to understand what the search phrase and question is actually getting at is, has always been difficult. But what comes so naturally with large language models is that common language understanding of what the question is. And with that understanding, you can obviously then translate that into massively more relevant retrieval and a lot of other things. But if NLP breaks down into natural language generation and natural language understanding, I think it's really important to communicate to people that there are two values contained in this wonderful new technology.
Absolutely. I want to move to the next slide because I think there's a lot of challenges, right? We talk about the fact that it's really good at understanding intent. It's like the days of building chatbots. We had to take all the utterances. Like if I need a password reset, there's all different ways of asking that question or stating that problem. I forgot my username, my password. password doesn't work. I'm locked out of my computer. My computer's mad at me. All those had to be classified into an intent. Well, this is what large language models do on steroids. They understand that and classify it into something that can be then retrieved. So talk about the initial challenges that you've seen in terms of both internally and externally. And who would like to take this? Brian, how about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Seth. Yeah, a lot of challenge. Like I said, 2 years into our journey. And I'll kind of go to the last slide too, a little story. Like a year and a half ago, we get meetings with a lot of customers saying, hey, my C-suite saying they use ChatGPT. Why can't we use it for search here in the company? and I think they quickly ran some PoCs with OpenAI and the such and found that, yeah, like Jeff was saying, the R is very important. So really the initial challenges where you can't have the hallucination rate like you do on some of the public models. They have so much data. You can't take that risk. So risk is a big thing I'm hearing from CIOs. An employee getting the wrong answer, making a big decision off of hallucination is risky. A customer making a decision or a purchase based on incorrect information, there's already been many lawsuits out there. So CIOs want to reduce their risk on the revenue, the productivity, customer sat. I think remember Chevrolet, someone bought a Chevy Tahoe for $1. They were early adopter of ChatGPT. Air Canada also were sued for getting an incorrect answer on their chatbot. So really helping them and some of the challenges around define the use case, the risks, how to deploy RAG correctly. So we reduce those hallucinations, either for the customer experience or the employee experience. So yeah, just a lot of the customers too, I've noticed have created governance, AI governance councils, and working with the councils to understand their methodology, what they've learned, where they want to go. And so that's why, organizations really have to adapt. They're learning a lot really fast. Like our conversations today are completely different than even a year ago. It's amazing, even month to month. It's great stuff.
Who else would like to chime in here in terms of initial challenges that you guys saw? Go ahead.
I think there's many, right? Definitely the education piece, right? But as Brian said, that's evolved quite a bit, right? I mean, the discussions that we're having now are very far away from last year.
How are they different? How are they different?
Well, initially it was more the question of why do we even need search, right? Like, why not just use Gen AI? Now it's more a question of, how do you play with Gen AI, right? How do you complete Gen AI, right? How does Gen AI complete your tool and offering? And I think it goes back to something that David said earlier as well, right? Which is really important, which is around like natural language understanding, semantic understanding as well. There's this expectation now that Gen AI really brought on search, actually, which is for search to truly understand natural language much better, right? You can't just slap lexical search on top of generative AI and call it proper RAG, right? You need to truly understand user intent, understand language to decipher that query, to make sure that what you're feeding to the generative model actually makes sense and actually lets it generate the best it can, right? And I think that's been a challenge also to really decipher that, explain why that matters to the market initially, and explaining why sophisticated search is more important than ever today.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I've always had customers say, well, we want it to be like Google. And I would say, well, put your search to be like Google. I'd say put as much time, energy, and resources into your content as people do who want to rank well in Google, and you will have a search like you'll have a Google-like experience. I mean, it's a fundamentally different paradigm in terms of how rankings go. And Google terms are much more, or search terms are a little more common in certain areas and not as esoteric. You're not going to get precise answers to, certain types of questions, but it works pretty well. But a lot of times, again, if your content isn't in good shape, it's not going to show up in a Google result. So people have to think of the same thing. What do we have to do to our content? How do we have to curate it, structure it, tag it, and organize it? Other thoughts? What else did you see in terms of opportunities? And again, I think what we're seeing is more attention to the foundational elements around content hygiene and knowledge capture and organization. What other thoughts do folks have?
I think if I may also, like internally, you see an opportunity and a threat in terms of, knowledge and education, right? On one hand, it's an opportunity to make people a lot more efficient. And on the other, it's a threat making people a lot lazier, right? And it's in human nature to be lazy, right? So what I've seen is specialists maybe sometimes refuse to use the tools by principle, right? Saying, no, I know how to write this. I can write my email by myself, right? Or on the other hand, people not learning to write as much, right? Like when you talk about, the younger generation getting on the market, on the workplace now, right?
Right. Right.
And it's definitely a challenge to adapt to that new reality of, oh, you have this superhuman tool now in your computer that can just do things for you, right? And knowing when and when not to use it, essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a really good point. Because again, it's like not it's like trying to travel without a GPS, right? You lose that muscle, you use that capability. What other challenges did you guys have and see internally or externally or both?
I'll throw out one that we saw certainly right away, and I would say that it has continued, and that is, what's it good for? What can it do and what can it not do? It's a new tool, but it is just that, a tool. It is not a do everything tool. It's a do a lot of things tool, but not a do everything. So there's still a bit of a challenge of, hey, can it do this, or should I apply it to this kind of a situation? And I think the industry is just going to have to learn exactly how to deploy it. And the models are going to get better too, but we don't exactly know where they're going to get better as time moves on. So that's going to be an ongoing thing. Here's a good place to deploy it. Here's a place where maybe you deploy it, but you keep a human in the loop. Here's a place where, you know what, it's good at this. We can actually let it automate, and we don't need a human in the loop to check it.
Yep. That's great observation. And any other opportunities that you guys see arising from the technology? Patrick, Sanjay, Dave?
General opportunity, I would say, is moving search from retrieving documents to retrieving answers intelligently. Some of the work that we're doing is also is non-textual. How do you get data? How do you drill into, let's say, tabular financial data and be able to intelligently answer questions about, money over time and things like that. But I think that the biggest sort of opportunity is the ability to automate, and there are so many use cases for automating with generative AI. The challenge bit of this slide that I would focus on is actually about knowledge itself, because enterprise knowledge itself, because with generative AI, we have these super eloquent automation engines that will converse with us, and some of it they're making things up, some of it they've got the right answer depending on how well they're connected to data. But what they don't have is an understanding of the process of a business unless you give it to them. And in our world, this is how we're doing that is we're saying ontology and taxonomy can represent how a business does business, how it processes. And that's really why, for me, it's a very exciting area to think about graphs of knowledge. This is not just graphs, but kind of taxonomies and ontologies, how they can be leveraged to give this eloquent technology framing in what the business does, what it does, and get that kind of benefit.
I've called the ontology the soul of the business, right? Because it contains knowledge about processes and relationships of concepts to other concepts, and it's the language of the business, it's the entities, it's what's important. It becomes that knowledge scaffolding for the organization that allows you to make sense and contextualize everything. And of course, generative AI really does require that. By the way, there is a Q&A tab, so if you have any questions, you can put them in there. So now that we see it's readily available for consumers, what does this mean for the enterprise? What are the obstacles that people are seeing? What do we need to do to really successfully deploy it? And how do we explain to executives that we need to have investments in foundational areas, right? It's not the magic. And I think we're starting to see these realizations, but what are your thoughts about the implications for the enterprise? Patrick or Sanjay, do you want to take that first?
Pat, you go ahead. No.
Go ahead, Sanjay.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I think one is kind of a big one. There's such a huge proliferation of you think about just like even models and tools, and it's the kind of bigger traditional problem we've seen it, as Brian knows, or like just from even like a solution engineering, is like trying to prescribe the right tool for the right job for the customer, and we've seen that across the board. Is one of the kind of the challenges and kind of an opportunity too, right? You get to find the right tool for the right fit, for the right task, right domain. There's so many different variables, and then I think that's kind of the bigger one of helping folks navigate through that, right? Is one of the foundational pieces for sure.
Proliferation of tools, the speed at which those tools are changing, the evolution of the models themselves, and there's a lot more complexity than initially appears. Patrick, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I've been in a lot of different businesses over my career, and I've consulted in government and healthcare and finance and insurance and manufacturing across the board. And what I've learned over the years is that even inside the enterprise, the work that everyone has to do, all the people listening, all of us on the panel, work is hard. And it requires a lot of information, it requires a lot of knowledge, and often it requires a lot of experience that too many times we don't have. And the promise of generative AI inside the enterprise is to provide that assistant that all of us, at least I, always wished I had, someone that I could turn to and go, hey, I have a question. And I didn't always have that person to turn to, or I'd have to schedule a meeting, or I'd have to interrupt somebody or whatever. This opportunity to bring an intelligent experience voice into my work context that I can ask anything, anytime, and get a reliable answer. That's something that is not really being talked about very much, but an opportunity inside the enterprise space that is potentially transformational.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. And then the question becomes, so what do people need to do this right? What are the challenges? Jeff, do you have some thoughts on what's standing in the way for organizations?
I think a lot of what's standing in the way, there's kind of like some standard things, right? There's time. It takes time to just do this, figure it out. How are we going to move forward? Where do we start? Those kinds of things. Security concerns, because people don't want to send their internal content to some of these large language model providers. Most companies have figured out a way to address that situation. The few where it's super critical, they're not using commercial models, they're using open source models. So there's some of those kinds of roadblocks that most of the organizations I talk to at this point are moving past. I think what it comes down to is, I would say, two things. I'd come back to what I said before. Make sure you know what it's good for and what it's not, because people are trying it to do certain things with expectations that are out of whack, either because it's not good for that or because they need to do a good RAG system and they don't have a good retrieval, or simply just because it's changing so fast. And I mean, even today, you can go out and you can search for one side of the argument on Google and then search for other side of the argument on Google, and you will find people who are saying very solidly that we're going in different directions. Yes, it can do this. No, it can't. So my advice is to get some help. It's really hard to keep up with the pace of the change. So, this isn't supposed to be a plug, but, work with somebody like Early Information Services, work with Patrick, get somebody who's in the space and knows what's going on, at least in an advisory role, so that you don't kind of make a big misstep. Because there's a lot of vendors promising lots of things, and most of them can deliver, but sometimes they're just putting a wrapper on top of a ChatGPT and calling it, the greatest intelligence we've ever seen. And, it may not turn out so well. So I would just say, hey, get some help somewhere along the way, because it's so much information is changing so quickly.
Jeff, and just to clarify, it's not a pitch for you guys, but yes, it's a pitch for us. That's okay. That's completely okay.
Oh, there, I gave you one.
No, thank you so much for that. But I think it is important to get good guidance, and I think it is important to trust the vendor. And a lot of vendors are selling aspirational functionality, as I like to call it. They're not lying. They intend to do something. They like to do it. They're trying to do it. And you're right, they're putting wrappers on open AI stuff, and they're not necessarily doing the work around knowledge architecture and information architecture. And we're seeing that over and over again, right? Because they're not getting the results they need, because they haven't really established optimized content for that retrieval purpose and for those use cases. So those are the things I say are necessary for deployment. Who else would like to add to that? Brian or Ollie?
Sure. I could jump in. I agree, Seth. I mean, even though it's a little bit of a plug, but yeah, the guidance is really key. more AI mature customers are already having that AI governance committees, and they kind of know what they want. They develop dozens of Gen AI use cases. Not all are search. They're prioritizing them and they're working with the vendors to deploy. But most of the enterprises out there don't have that, and they're starting to get pressure. So one of the obstacles is getting executive buy-in. C-suite executives start to create these initiatives. They're hearing on CNBC, seems like week to week, how these companies are Gen AI ready, they're adopting Gen AI, and it's transferring all the way to higher earnings per share on their earnings statements. And the more they hear that, the more you're going to get the top-down approach. You're going to get the buy-in, the funding of not just the governance teams, but also vendors, and how they can streamline all these operations across the org. So yeah, just executive buy-in, because I've seen at least a year ago, a lot of these Gen AI POCs, a lot of POCs kind of went to die, not just search, but a lot of vendors, they produced something really cool and sent around, but it didn't really go anywhere. But this seems to be the year of execution. Let's deploy it. And it needs the guidance. It needs the buy-in, not just from IT, because that's where a lot of IT will spin up a POC pretty easily. But if you get the business buy-in, the executive buy-in, it's going to be transformative.
And I agree with you that a lot of POCs are not really meant to scale. So that's why they don't go out of POC and get into production. We try to create POVs, proof of value, that are scalable, right? So we look at the underlying problems around the data, and tools like all of your tools are great to prototype in, right? I mean, that's what's so wonderful about the technology today. And each of the search vendors have tools that can be very quickly stood up and start to show value almost from the start, because there are certain things you can do. Even if your content is not wonderful, you can still get some value. You can still improve things, but obviously it also exposes many of the problems with content and knowledge and data, and then it gives you a path to start to remediate. So other thoughts around explaining to executives that, hey, it's not as easy as switching on, turning a switch, or are they already over that? Do they already understand that?
I think they already understand that, but if I may add, Seth, to what Brian said, right? Like, I think there's the opposite too, right? Where you do have the executive buy-in, but sometimes the teams don't know exactly what to deploy. And I think what you want to avoid too is saying, we need Gen AI without like a concrete use case, without a concrete goal, right?
Right.
As with any business project, you should build a business case. There should be an ROI. There should be value for you, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that needs to be front and center too. And sometimes it's forgotten in these hype cycles. You just want to get in the wagon and get it and start things going. In terms of successful deployments too, I think the quality of your content will translate directly into what you're generating, but also I think it's about seeing content differently to what you were seeing at before. A lot of the retailers in commerce, for instance, that I work with, we're seeing content as a way to generate more organic traffic to their site, right? As to curate essentially their organic ranking, essentially with search, vendors such as Google. Now they need to see it more as educational piece, right? And sometimes adding a bit more of that brand factor, that brand affinity, to make sure that the summarization that gets done by those LLMs is actually on par with their brand image and messaging.
I think those are really good points, because the SEO is changing, right? Now it's going to be generative search optimization or generative engine optimization, where you say, how do I show up in these AI overviews? And there's a lot of other nuance to that, but informative content and not keyword stuffing, is really, or keyword density, right? Is not going to work. So I think the big thing here is, when you explain to executives why you need to make these investments in foundational areas, it is based on those use cases, right? It is based on a library of use cases. How do you know what good looks like? How do you know what success is? Can you do these things? So I'm a big believer in, and then do you have baselines for when you can do those things or not do those things? So can you turn around, a trouble ticket in a first call resolution? Do you have those foundational metrics? What does it take you today? And then what is it going to take you once you deploy these types of tools? So you need baselines, you need metrics, you need business case, ROI. You need to say, why are you doing this? And what does good look like? Not just deploy RAG, but deploy it in a meaningful way. Any other thoughts on this slide, or should I move to the next?
And one last thing also, from my perspective, there's also the willingness to experiment, right? Like in the end, this is still new technology. As much as it's scaled up quickly and it's, highly scalable, leveraged quite a bit. We have a lot of customers deploying this in production. You can prevent hallucinations, but you can't prevent everything just yet,
Mhm.
right? So you can prevent it from saying false things. You cannot prevent it from sometimes, restructuring things in a way you wouldn't want to, or that sort of stuff. So you need to have a willingness at this stage still
Right.
to experiment and iterate to leverage this sort of technology. It can bring great
Absolutely.
results, but it does have its side effects, right?
Great. Thank you. I think those are really good observations. By the way, I do want to understand what search vendors are you guys using now? This is just FYI. So we have another poll here that will pop up, and just curious if you guys are using any of these tools. We have one, let's see, Microsoft. Yeah, I guess we were expecting that. A few, Elastic. Okay. Another person or two. Oh, there's a Coveo customer in there. Come on, Squirro. Come on, Squirro. Come on. Lucidworks. Anyone? Lucidworks. Looks like we only have a few people, 7, 8 folks. I think we had 8 last time. So I won't look for a bump in participation at this point, but looks like Microsoft is the, let me go ahead and close this and share the result. Oops, sorry. Share the results. I think Carolyn and I were both had our finger on the trigger. So Microsoft and Elastic, and then there's a bunch of others there. Anyway, that was just for us to kind of know who you guys were looking at. So when you think about this, what are people missing? So give us your thoughts. What are people missing? What are they not getting? And what are you seeing in terms of awareness in the marketplace? What are the biggest areas of hype, and what are realistic expectations? So Jeff, do you want to kick us off there?
I'll echo some of the thoughts that I've said before, which is this is starting to settle down. Last year or even 6 months ago, these conversations were very different from where they are now. So there's some reality seeping in to understand, hey, I want to deploy generative AI. I'm going to need to pair that with a search tool of some kind. And, I'm going to have to put that into a use case that start with the low-hanging fruit. You hear a lot about customer service, you hear a lot about sales, and you hear a lot of internal stuff. So it's about aligning all of that. What's cool for me looking forward when you talk about what are realistic expectations, I had a conversation yesterday with a company, and they were saying, look, this is what we want to do. We want to be able to do this. And she kind of envisioned this multi-step assistant which knows the person and understands the business and the processes that are kind of incorporated into the company, maybe not necessarily explicitly written down, but just kind of how these things work. And what she articulated would have been pure fantasy 2 years ago. And I was able to say, yeah, that's where we're headed. Can we do that like tomorrow? No, because we're still kind of figuring out the edges of all of this stuff. But everything that you've described is conceptually possible. So all you have to do is understand what's your content look like internally. What's your, do you have the content curated in such a way that it can feed the large language models the correct context to be able to do these things you're talking about? And then pair that with search to be able to retrieve the kind of information necessary to take these steps, pair it with a workflow that is, rigid where it needs to be rigid and flexible where it needs to be flexible. We have all the building blocks and we have all the components in place. So if that's what you want to do, you can start today and have something in place that actually realizes that vision. So when it comes to realistic expectations, maybe I'm techno optimist, but there really aren't a lot of things that complete automation, complete reliability, those are not realistic expectations. I did have somebody come to me and say, hey, I want to have the AI read a document and create a process diagram out of it that I can then use people to follow. I'm like, no, you don't want to do that yet.
Yeah, right.
So there are a few things that are kind of not foreseeable in the near term future, but there's so many things that are part of our normal course of getting work done that over the next year or two, even if the technology doesn't get any better than it is today, that we can now address as we put these tools together.
Terrific. Thank you. We are running short on time. Let's try to get some other thoughts on this slide, and then we'll try to get through another slide or two. Who would like to make a comment, especially what's the awareness that we're seeing in the marketplace? I mean, it's a little bit of a self-selected audience. Dave, did you have some thoughts? there?
Yeah, well, kind of picking up on what Jeff just said about really setting the expectation that you can't automate everything. We've always had the silver bullet problem of people think they can buy a box and it's going to, do everything. And it's no different with generative AI. It's super, super good at certain things, but it's not going to replace human beings in certain other areas. And from my perspective, we have to give Gen AI solutions knowledge about the organization. And this goes back to ontologies and taxonomies. They are machine interpretable representations of knowledge. And when you pair that with generative AI, you have something that is even more capable. Those ontologies are not going to be automatically generated. They are, it's a bit like, back in relational database days, automate. You wouldn't press a button and automate the building of the tables and the joins and all of that logic. You need humans to do that. When you've done it, you have a framework that, can drive lots of automation. So setting that potential misconception with some organizations. You can't automate everything, but there's still tons of automation that is capable after you have these frameworks.
Sanjay, I see you're off mute. Did you have a thought you wanted to contribute?
I mean, just to add on maybe to the theme of these use cases, I guess, is the a lot of folks we run into really are not quite sure what the model knows or doesn't know. I think especially when it comes to their information, like what it can answer, they're using it and thinking, of course, that it can synthesize a lot without us giving it a lot of context, right? And that does include the information architecture and metadata and those sorts of things. And I think that's part of it. And, we're all like search folks here. I think where they sometimes struggle with relevance or recall and rank and those sorts of things. I think some of the same underlying like data issues are still persistent here when it comes to that, right? And even what data you need. I mean, we had I think Jeff brought up the customer use case where you do need customer data. You need them, what products they own, for example, to potentially feed some of that context, right? To give it some of that history or memory to provide responses. So I think that part of it is at least we're seeing that's still kind of missing. It's not gonna intend to take it so far, but there's a lot of other like data that might be whatever products they own, for example, right? Or if it's a technician, right? Like what's that technician background that's missing, and so that sort of thing is
absolutely. I'm going to move to our thoughts. We had a couple of things here, but we're kind of out of time, so I wanted to get your final thoughts, and maybe we could put those in terms of the recommendation. So let's combine that. What are your final thoughts? So let's start with Ollie, and then we'll work our way up on my screen.
Yeah, sure. Final thoughts is, I think Gen AI brings a slew of opportunities. My recommendation, and it's really not to sell our stuff, right, but work with people who are in the field, work with vendors who actually have these technologies deployed. It's essentially a new layer of technology that's accessible now, right? But it's still technology, still requires expertise. But overall, looking forward to, what's to come in the coming years for sure. And it's made search more than exciting again. It's made search super relevant again, I would say, even. So, yeah.
And Dave, I know thank you, Ollie. I had you at the top, but you were at the bottom of my screen, so you'll go next.
So keeping it brief, I think about augmenting humans, not replacing them. How do we empower people in their jobs? With that, it's thinking beyond information retrieval, which is traditionally what we're all about, to how do you improve workflow? How do you improve decision making through automation?
Yeah, great, wonderful, Brian.
My recommendation is work with your vendor with some expertise such as yours to help define the use case, the baseline, the KPIs, what you need, also the model and the correct prompting. I see a lack of mature prompting engineering expertise in a lot of organizations. I think it's going to change in the next 3 years. So if you can leverage that from a partner, from a vendor, it's great. So just to help move along all these use cases, there's going to be dozens of Gen AI use cases across not just search but other vendors. But as much as you can leverage those partners for these types of things.
And Jeff, your thoughts?
My recommendation is get started if you haven't already. It's super powerful technology. And so you need to get experience with it, find some low hanging fruits, some quick win projects, get it deployed, learn about it, and then build from there. It can do so many things. We've barely scratched the surface. I mean, yeah, we've been doing this for 2 years, but we are at the very beginning.
Yep. And Patrick, final word?
Maximize human potential. That's what we're here for.
Sanjay, a final word?
Just like any new technology, you make sure you're measuring it and thinking about the outcomes you want and being able to test it, right? There's nothing new from that perspective, right? As we bring in anything new like this.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate your help. We have a knowledge management and AI assessment if you're interested in that. We also have a workshop that we did. This is something we did half day. We can do this a full day. There's the knowledge architecture for generative AI. You can take a look at that at your leisure and then reach out and connect with folks. And thank you for staying with us. We went a couple of minutes over and appreciate your time and your patience. And thanks to all of our panelists for their valuable contributions and insights. And thank you to Carolyn for running the train, keeping the trains running behind the scenes. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Seth.
It was a pleasure.
Pleasure.